Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be discussing how to heal moral injury. This is the second of two videos I'm doing on moral injury. In the first one I talked about what is moral injury, what does it feel like. I explained how I like to conceptualize it as three relationships that we're trying to heal. I talk about the kind of the key idea for healing moral injury is an old saying or an old idea that to understand all is to forgive all. That the more that we can understand the patterns involved and the more that we can understand about people, the easier it will be for us to forgive, and that forgiveness is a necessary step in the process of repairing those relationships, right? So if you think about maybe, think about a situation where someone's cheated on by their spouse, right? What would they need in order to get to the point of forgiveness? Like probably a few different things, but one of the first things they would want to understand why the person did it. Is it me? Is it you? It's like why did you go and do this thing, right? And it's kind of a similar mechanism here where we have to understand the patterns involved so that we can get to the point where we can forgive. But beyond that, it's actually quite a bit more complicated. Because what we're dealing with are our very most core beliefs about the world. Is the world a good place or a bad place? Are people good or are they bad? Am I good or am I bad? And those are very, very difficult beliefs to change. Like very difficult, like almost impossible, because they're so foundational, so fundamental for one. And then for two, we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And almost all those thoughts have been influenced by these three relationships, because nothing exists outside of these three relationships. The relationship that you have with yourself determines how you think about you and how you relate to other people and how you think about your place in the world. How you think about people, well, that's a whole lot of your life. And in the world, well, that's existence itself, right? And so this has drastically affected the way that we, not just the way we perceive the world, but in turn, the way that we think and feel about the world. And those have become habits because we've done them our whole life. Not only that, but I've discussed in the last video how moral injury almost kind of ends up being like a bad mood in the way that it affects our personality. And so if you've been I was a very angry person for a lot of my life. And it was very difficult for me to not be an angry person because I had to change my personality. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And so let's start with beliefs, because that's kind of where we need to start. So our beliefs are formed through our experiences, and we have beliefs about literally everything. And so if you grew up in a modern country, you walk into a bathroom and you expect that there's a light switch, that when you flip the switch, a light will turn on, right? But somebody that lived thousands of years ago wouldn't have that expectation, because they didn't have those experiences to lead them to believe that there's going to be a switch on the wall that turns on a light. Likewise, somebody that grew up in a country where there was no electricity, let's say, maybe they grew up somewhere very poor or somewhere very rural or a tribal situation, I don't know, something like that. Maybe they didn't grow up with light switches, so when they go into a dark bathroom, it doesn't even occur to them to look for a light switch, because that's not a way that they've come to think about reality. That's not an expectation that they have, right? And similarly, someone that has experienced moral injury is going to have different expectations of themselves, people, and reality as a result of their experiences and the beliefs that those experiences formed. Another example that I like to use is if you were gonna program artificial intelligence to detect cancer in X-rays, you would show it thousands of X-rays and some of them would look like cancer, to be things that looked like cancer, and some would be cancer. And as it guessed, you would tell it if it was right or wrong, and maybe you'd, do something about why it was right or wrong. And over time, through all those iterations, it would learn what cancer looked like and what kind of looked like cancer but wasn't, right? And that's generally how we learn about the world, through tens of thousands of experiences, and all of those experiences have shaped our beliefs. But with the case of trauma, it's like, how many times do you have to touch a hot stove and burn yourself before you learn, like, don't touch the hot stove, right? Because it's such a powerful experience. Pain really, locks in kind of those beliefs. It becomes a very powerful learning experience for us, right? And so a traumatic event is really going to, shape and solidify those core beliefs. Now, you might wonder why we wouldn't eventually naturally realize that our conceptions of reality are wrong, right? Like, okay, so trauma, we touch the hot stove, but then we have all these other experiences to teach us that the stove isn't hot, sort of sticking with that analogy, right? Well, the problem is that once you've experienced moral injury and you've shifted the way that you see the world, now you're not seeing the world in a way that's going to allow for you to form positive beliefs. Also, generally, the default mode is to go through life basically looking for facts and stories and ideas that support our existing beliefs. And so it ends up being very difficult to reprogram our beliefs, especially to the degree that they're core beliefs or fundamental beliefs. And the way I like to think about it is, imagine yourself standing inside of a giant Christmas ornament that's like, I don't know, 6 feet or 8 feet in diameter, right? And it's made out of stained glass. So there's all like hundreds, maybe thousands of panes of stained glass, right? And you don't see the world, you see the world through those panes of glass, right? And that's your beliefs. Your beliefs shape the way that you see reality, because we don't see reality as it is. We see reality as we perceive it. And it's not just beliefs that shape the way that we see reality, it's also our personality. And it's also to some degree how we're feeling. Because if you're really angry, like if you've ever been really upset about something, you know that you don't think the same way you do when you're not upset, right? And if you're feeling really indifferent, you don't think the same way as when you're not feeling really indifferent, right? Same thing with resentment, with anger, with any of those negative emotions. If you could turn a knob, right, and take it from 0 to 10, the more you turn the knob, it would shift the way that you see reality. And as you turn it back down, it would shift it back, right? And so what we're doing with trying to heal this is we're basically trying to rearrange those panes, right? So that we see the world differently, and in turn think and feel about the world differently. And so the tricky thing is that a lot of times you can't just change one little pane, because it's related, this belief is related to all these other beliefs. And so you've got to go in and like rearrange whole sections. And when you start messing with your beliefs, you're going to experience that as confusion, which is a form of psychological pain. So it's not necessarily a pleasant process to engage in, because what you're doing is you're basically finding ways that you're wrong. That's what it feels like, right? Because you believe right now, the way you see the world, that's your truth with a capital T for you. And so if you start going and looking for ways of seeing the world differently, the only way to do that is to find the ways that you're quote unquote wrong. And I'm not trying to say that you're wrong. It's like you have to come to that determination. I'm just telling you how it feels. It feels like you're admitting that you've been wrong. And that's very difficult for us to do, right? And one of the experiences that I had with psilocybin is that psilocybin would take me from being like really depressed, and it would lift me out of that. And instead of seeing the world as a shitty, gross place and people as, and myself as, it's like all of a sudden it's like the world was beautiful, people were good for the most part, we all struggle, we all suffer, and that makes us behave in ways we wish we didn't, maybe, right? Large and small. But what would happen is so I'd have an experience with psilocybin and boom, it's like the world would look way better. But then over the course of like a month, I would slowly drift back to feeling the same way I did before. And it took a while, and it felt like it was like 10 steps forward, 9 steps back, right? And so I started trying to figure out what's happening? What's shifting when I go from feeling depressed to not depressed? And then what's shifting when I go from feeling not depressed back to feeling depressed? And what I realized was that we have habits in the way that we think, in the way that we feel, in particular the stories that we tell ourselves. So I used to find myself saying some variant of people suck, or I hate people. And I'd just find myself saying that 20 times a day, 50 times a day, 100 times a day, who knows? Depends, right? But if someone cut me off in traffic, or there was some idiot at the grocery store that was taking forever in the checkout line or whatever, right? It's like, oh, people suck, I hate people, right? Something like that. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so what you end up with are ruts. That's actually how I actually think thinking of them as ruts is better, because if you think of a rutted road, right? What happens if you're driving on a rutted road is the tires want to slide into the rut, right? And because you have these habits and these well-worn neural pathways in the way that you think about the world, the way you feel about the world, and the way you perceive the world, those beliefs don't just go away because you had this experience of psilocybin. It's like your psychedelic Christmas ornament, right? With all this panes of stained glass, everything gets rearranged, right? The psilocybin comes in and it's we'll fix this up over here and fix this up over here. And oh, look at this. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, this looks fucking awesome, right? But then slowly over time, because of your habits, right? And those neural ruts, you start telling yourself it's the same old story, and you start thinking in the same ways, and pretty soon you're perceiving in the same ways that you always have, and you're back to being depressed. That was my experience with it. And so what we have to do is we have to consciously keep ourselves out of those ruts. And so what I realized was when I would have these experiences with psilocybin, I would then have to maintain the shifts that I achieved. And so I created this model fairly early on in my journey in an attempt to understand the ways that the different parts of me interacted with each other. And so basically the way the model is set up is like I said, you don't experience reality as it is. You experience reality as you see it. And so what determines the way that you see it are primarily two things: your beliefs and personality traits. And Jordan Peterson has done a lot of work on perception. I'm going to link a few videos of his down in the description. His work has been more focused on the effects that value systems and ethics have on perception, and in turn, the effects that has on the way that we act in the world. Whereas I'm more focused on kind of the experience and how we experience the world and how the world makes us feel. And I think because that's more, I think, relevant to moral injury. And so with beliefs, some examples would be like, imagine a headline, Trump goes to prison, something like that, right? You probably just reacted to that idea. You either reacted negatively or positively, depending on your beliefs. People have their beliefs, and as a result of those beliefs, they think and feel about certain things certain ways, right? And then when it comes to personality traits, there was a study they did where they looked at the correlation between personality traits and political opinions, and they found that there is a pretty strong correlation, actually. So, for example, one personality trait is openness, and that's a measure of the degree to which a person is interested in or likes new and novel ideas. And people that are high in openness tend to lean left, which makes sense, right? Because it's like the liberal, progressive, like trying new things, trying to make things better. So it makes sense that people that like new ideas would lean left. And there were some other correlations with some other personality traits they found. I'll put a couple links in the description about that. And so that's what the top part of this model is supposed to represent. It's representing that you don't experience the world, you experience the world as it's filtered through your beliefs and your personality. And then the lower part of it is your feelings also affect how you're perceiving the situation. And so, like I've said, if you're really angry, if you're really resentful, if you're really indifferent, it's going to change the way that you perceive the world. And likewise, the way that you think can affect the way that you perceive things. Although I will say that the kind of the default, like normal mode that most people start in, I think everyone starts in, is that our thinking is primarily affected by our feeling and our perception. And so to then use your thinking mind to change your feelings and to change your perception, actually, that's a skill that you're going to have to learn. Because what my sense of it is that the way that you think about something, the way you perceive something, and the way that you feel about something, those three things need to be congruent. In other words, they need to kind of agree with each other. So it's like if you feel angry, you're going to think thoughts justifying why you feel angry. And any thoughts that run contrary to that are going to feel like a lie, basically, right? And it's kind of the same thing with perception. Like our feeling and our thinking needs to line up with our perception. Otherwise it feels off, it feels wrong. But in order to reprogram these beliefs, we have to start playing this game of where we're becoming aware of the way we're feeling, of the way we're thinking. How are we talking to ourselves? What's the story that we're telling ourselves? And the reason that I located perception right on the border between, you could kind of think of it as the border between the unconscious and conscious mind if you want, is that the way that you perceive something isn't immediately obvious, because you're mostly dealing with your thoughts and your feelings. And then so to actually stop and think like, wait a minute, how am I actually perceiving this? Requires you to compare that perception to something else, which means you have to be able to shift and see the situation at least from one other perspective, because otherwise you're not going to be able to identify what your perception is, because it has to stand in relationship to a different perception in some way, shape, or form, right? And it's also difficult sometimes to discern, like, is our perception of something because of how we're feeling, what we believe, or a personality trait? And the analogy I like to use with that is, like, imagine like a white sheet hanging in a room, and on the other side of the white sheet there's a bunch of different random objects, lawnmowers and chairs and who knows what, right? And then there's random lights. And so there's all these weird shadows being cast on this sheet. And something that looks like a end table might actually be a chair. It's just turned a certain way, and the way that the shadow's casting, it looks like it's like an end table or a nightstand or something, right? And so it takes some effort to investigate our perception of any given situation to figure out, well, what are the underlying beliefs? You know, is this being affected by my mood, by the way that I'm feeling right now? Is there some aspect of my personality? Is there some personality trait that's impacting the way that I see and think about this? I'll give you an example. I was traveling with a friend of mine, and we were hiking down to a beach to camp for the night. And I'm an introvert, he's an extrovert. I had a lot of negative experiences with groups of people when I was younger, and he had a lot of positive experiences with groups of people when he was younger. And so my hope was that there was no one on the beach or just a few other people, and we could just like have a chill time, and no one was going to be rowdy, and no one was going to bother us, and nothing like that, right? And even though I'm a grown man, I'm not worried about being bullied or anything, it's still that kind of like belief that I just don't want to be around people. One, because I'm an introvert, and two, because I've had a lot of negative experiences with people in my life. And so I just would rather we hang out and just chill and have a good time. But he was hoping that there were people there that we could meet and make friends with and hang out with. And so that's an example of like, well, which is it exactly? Is it the introversion, or is it the beliefs, right? Is it the personality trait, or is it the beliefs that was affecting the way that I was thinking and feeling about that situation? And I wasn't that worried about it, but I thought that was a good example. So as we start becoming aware of our perceptions and why we're perceiving a situation, then we can start consciously choosing, is that the way that I wanted to see this? Is that the way I want to think about this? Is this the story I want to tell myself? Because those three things, the way you perceive it, the way you think about it, the story you're telling yourself, and the way you think about the story you're telling yourself are really kind of the same thing, right? But that really is going to determine how you feel. And so if you're perceiving things in a way, and you're talking to yourself and you're thinking in a way that makes you feel really negative, you're going to feel really negative. And so then the result of that is you feel shitty. I mean, you're just going to feel like crap. That's how it felt for me. And so it's like you have to kind of go through this process and figure out like, what version of reality do you want to live in? Is the world really as bad as you feel like it is? Or are there some good things about it? And this is one of the reasons I say that you have to become bigger than the things that happen to you. Because this is like, life is fucking hard, and it's brutal, and there are aspects of it that are fucking savage. And that's why we hide those things from children until they're ready to deal with them. Because it's like, look, 99% of the world is beautiful and wonderful and cool and awesome. But there's like this 1% that's fucking hell on earth, right? And if you happen to somehow fall into that hell, especially at a young age, then you don't conceptualize that as 1% of the world. That just is the world. A lot of this journey really is about making sense of evil. And I really, like, for me, it became about like basically forgiving God for the existence of evil. And I know that's kind of a weird way to put it, but it's like I just couldn't reconcile why a loving God would allow there to be so much evil in the world. It just didn't make sense to me. And it took me a long time to kind of figure that out. And I'm going to make a different video about that, because that's a whole other topic. And like I said, I get into metaphysics. But this is really about determining, you know, what is true? What is the truth? Is the world a bad place? Or did you have some bad things happen to you that tainted the way that you see the world? And now you have to kind of come up with a more complicated way of seeing the world. You know, one of the things that Jordan Peterson talks about is that people that have experienced trauma need a complicated philosophy for evil. And I agree with that. And there's a really awesome lecture called, I think it's called Tragedy versus Evil. I think that's the name of the lecture, but I'll link it in the description. And I highly recommend you watch that if you've experienced trauma, because it's got some really powerful and useful ideas in it. And so, you know, a lot of this is just about kind of making sense of things, making sense of evil, making sense of the world, making sense of why anyone would want these kinds of experiences. Like, why would all this exist? You know, it doesn't immediately make sense. You know, there's certain, like, I tend to think of feelings like anger, resentment, fear. Those are survival emotions, right? We have those emotions basically to harden us to the world and to almost like kind of help us survive, right? But they're really miserable, like, places to live in, right? Like, to be a really angry, nihilistic, resentful person is like, that's not a fun way to live life. You're not gonna enjoy life if that's your personality, right? And so to go in and to reprogram your core beliefs, to reprogram your personality, like, this is a lot of effort. And what you're really doing is, this is what I call psychological growth and transformation, PG&T. And it's a process, as far as I can tell, it's the same process. It's been called different things. It's been modeled in different ways. And the more complex something is, the more ways of understanding it you need, or the more models for it you need, right? And the human mind is the most complex thing in the universe. And so the development of the human mind makes sense that would be super complex too, right? And so Maslow called it self-actualization. Carl Jung called it individuation. Robert Keegan had a 5-stage model. I need to learn more about that one because stage 5 is the self-transforming or self-authoring mind. I don't know, but and that's really what we're doing. We're transforming ourselves. We're figuring out, how do we want to think about the world? How do we want to see the world? What kind of emotions do we want to live in? And one of the other things that I would say that you have to learn in order to really do this is to learn to live from the inside out. And what that means is we tend to, the default mode as we go through life, and we feel based on our experience. So if we want to feel better, we go and have some experience to make ourselves feel better, right? We go get some ice cream, or, you know, go to a movie or amusement park or whatever, right? We do something to make us feel the way that we want to. And we also, if something bad is happening to us, we feel like we should feel bad about that, right? But what you'll learn through this process is a lot of life is there's a saying, I don't remember who said it, I'll just throw it up on the screen. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Man, that's so true. And there's certain things, there's certain ideas that, like lessons, like I have to keep learning like over and over and over again, right? And that's one of them. So hopefully that all kind of made sense. I don't know, leave it in the comments, or I'm going to start a discussion for this one on the subreddit, on the Rethinking PTSD subreddit, because I think this is one that's going to probably confuse a lot of people, because these are like new ideas, like really like delving into your mind like this. And what you have to do is you have to develop your ego to like some pretty high stages. Like you have to go through like several stages of development to get to the point where you can actually like accomplish all of this. And so it's pretty challenging, and it's literally, it's work, it's hard, it's effort, and it's going to take time. So hopefully you're finding these videos useful and interesting. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below. All that helps me with the algorithm, helps grow the channel, helps get these ideas in front of more people. That's really ultimately the goal, is to help as many people as possible. So hopefully you're one of those people. Hopefully you're finding this useful. Thanks for watching.